Travis Campbell out in Georgia. How you doing in this summer?
Well, I look more tired than you, and it's 11 here or so, and it's like 8 there or so.
I'm
And you
wide
look
awake, brother. I'm wide awake. I'm ready to go.
you look fantastic.
I feel fantastic. I'm in Los Angeles. Why would I not feel fantastic?
Yeah, it has its advantages being
Yep.
out there in the valley.
I was arguing with a friend, talking to a friend of mine who feels the same way I do. He says, you know what? There's so many things wrong in this state, the politics and the traffic. And then I said, there's 40 million people here. I said, imagine if things were good here politically. What would
Yeah,
it be like? It'd be like 60 million people here.
that's right.
So I don't know. I don't want to say thank you, Lord, for all the problems in California, but you know what? There's a lot of cool things here. I really like it.
I would imagine that. I mean, with the couple of years that I went out to work at RTB, Reasons to Believe, and then just the visiting from time to time for whatever reason, I've probably spent maybe a total of 6 months in
Yeah.
Los Angeles. I guess that would be a fair estimation. And I will say that, I mean, it's the greatest place to visit. I mean, when you're not paying taxes and all that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
no, it was, and of course, the Reasons to Believe staff set me up in a condo, and I was able to just sort of, just scoot around and just the greatest weather.
Yep.
And I could be at a mountain or a big city or the beach. I mean, it took me 2 hours to get wherever I was going to get. But I think the saying is you can be anywhere in 2 hours, and you have to wait 2 hours to be anywhere.
Yeah, it's true.
This is one of those.
True.
But I mean, it was fantastic. Now the traffic is horrible. I was going to see my brother-in-law who lives in Anaheim.
Yeah.
And I looked at my my phone to see the distance. I was following my GPS on my phone, and it said I was 4 miles away, ETA 28 minutes.
Yep. Yep.
I can get out and walk. I can just leave my car here on the highway and get there quicker.
Yep. It's true.
So,
well, Travis, I'm really proud of you, man. Last few days ago, you did an honest to goodness formal debate. And the link to that is in the show notes and below. Yes. And why don't you tell us? I want to know, you did a debate on God's existence, and it was fairly technical. You were debating you and Richard Howe from Southeast. Is it Southeast Seminary? Southern
Evangelical Seminary.
Debated two atheist guys, and I got to say that it was a very friendly, cordial debate. You guys took after Gavin Ortland and did a really. It was just really fun to watch because nobody was at each other's throats. There was no ad hominem stuff. It was just debating the issues. So why did you take on this subject, and why did you do it now? Talk about what you were trying to do.
For years, I've had friends say to me, you should get out there and debate. I mean, I teach this subject on a high school level, and I engage in conversations with people about this stuff all the time, but I had never been in a formal debate on any of this. And so I finally just said, okay, I'll reach out. So I reached out to Modern Day Debate, and I said, I'd like to put my name in the hat if you have anybody that would be interested in this. And I gave them the general format as to what I wanted to do. And I said, because of my classes and all that, I would like some time to reflect on it. And so given those parameters, they began searching for people that might be interested. And finally, Ben Watkins and Ben Bavar, they work over at Real Atheology. Real Atheology is a podcast where they discuss these issues, and they're kind of, you and I do Christ on purpose. They do atheology on purpose. Atheologians, they are people who don't believe that God exists, and they don't think that the arguments for God's existence are good.
So I really like their term for themselves. They called themselves non-resistant, non believers,
Yeah,
right? Or
non-resistant
non-theists.
non-believers.
Yeah,
And,
I like
and
that.
they're one of the things that they're trying to do is raise the level of conversation. They don't like the new atheists and what they were about. For them, um, Dawkins and Hitchens and those guys were too, is a general point. They are just too complacent and too dismissive of religion. I mean, their demeanor kind of reminds me of Michael Roos. Michael Roos is an atheist
Yeah,
philosopher of science. And Roos has famously said that whenever he reads Dawkins, he's embarrassed to call himself an atheist because he realizes that, Roos is going to be one of those guys who's going to say to you, yeah, you have grown up answers to real problems, real philosophical conundrums that we face. Theists have grown up answers to them. And no theist is going to be flummoxed by, well, who designed the designer, which
right.
Richard Dawkins thinks is the ace trump against theism or something. It's just like, that's ridiculous. Nobody in his right mind would do that. And Bavar and Watkins understand that. They get what we're saying. So you know how most of the time you'll be in a conversation with somebody and they just don't get the argument.
Yeah,
And sometimes you start doubting yourself. Well, maybe if I'm coming across all these atheists that don't get the argument, maybe it's me. It's kind of like, I've gone out on 20 dates and none of these girls are worthy of dating. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Maybe we need to start looking in the mirror a little bit and doing some internal assessments. Maybe I'm the problem. And so you started, doubt yourself. Well, to their credit, they know the issues. And so that's why there was a real clash in our conversation. Clash doesn't mean we're cutting each other's throats, literally or figuratively, but clash means that there's a real understanding of one another. And there's a real point of dispute where both sides understanding each other and they're both just giving a principled argument against one another.
yeah.
And that's where you have a good discussion. So even though it's not exciting, no one was yelling at each other. So it may not make a short clip for modern debate, where they throw it out to advertise their channel. It was a positive exchange for that reason.
Can you tell the audience, back up a hair and say, what is modern debate? I didn't know about that site. What do they do?
I don't know exactly when they were founded, but they've been around for quite a while. I guess about 10 years or so. James Kuntz is the one who runs it. And it's a neutral platform. He is himself a Christian, but it's a neutral platform to have debates on all kinds of topics. So it's not just God's existence. It's Islam versus Christianity. It's flat earthers versus global earthers. I actually co-moderated a debate months ago on the moon landing. I found myself bored to death with the debate. I just found the guy who said that we didn't land on the moon. I found his argument just horrible. So it's hard for me to be unbiased on that. But and that debate was more exciting than ours because the guy who was supporting the moon landing was just he actually said, "You're not." He goes, "You don't deny the moon landing because you're stupid. You're stupid because you deny the moon landing." That was a comment that came out of his mouth. So he went totally ad hominem on his opponent.
Wow.
Now that was the exact opposite of what we were trying to do on ours. So Modern Day Debate, though, is a wonderful platform. It can get, you can lower the level of discourse as some people do. We were all trying to raise it. So,
well, I think you were really successful. It's a 3.5 hour debate. I watched the whole thing, and I learned a lot. And Travis, you defended a position called classical theism.
yeah.
Can you explain to the audience what that is? Because that's a very narrow definition. And what was it you were trying to do there?
Well, you can think of worldview as kind of like a circle that you can step into. Here, getting myself in screen. So if you step into the circle of Abrahamic theism, that doesn't mean that all the Abrahamic theists are going to think about God the same way. or they're going to think about religion the same way. Abrahamic theism is the view of God that, at least according to tradition, can be traced back to Abraham, the patriarch of the Hebrew people. It's a form of monotheism, and it's a view of God that says, as a fundamental point, that there is one personal and supernatural being who is all powerful, all knowing, and all good. This being is the creator and sustainer of the universe and is the locus of our moral values. That would be a very standard view of what Abrahamic theism is.
And Abrahamic theism traditionally is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Correct?
Yes, that is right. So you have religious disputes between Abrahamic theists, between the monotheistic religions that you just mentioned. You also have philosophical disputes between Abrahamic theists, and that would be between people who have a different understanding, for example, of God's knowledge and his power and his goodness. So I divide between three types of philosophical Abrahamic theists. So you have classical theists, which I'll talk about in a second. You have neoclassical theists, and then you have neotheists or open theists. The neotheists are individuals who think, for example, that God is all powerful, but in his omnipotence, he decided to limit his power to accommodate for humans with free will. They also believe that God is all knowing, but even though God is all knowing, that doesn't mean that he knows the future. God exhaustively comprehends the present because he's all knowing, but he doesn't exhaustively comprehend the future because truth is, you can't know anything unless it's true, and truth is correspondence with reality. But since the future doesn't exist, there's no reality to which a future tense proposition can correspond to. And so future tense propositions like the sun is rising, will rise tomorrow, that statement is not false, but it's not true either.
Because
it's just neither true nor false.
Now, do you think that we're kind of I'm going off on a little rabbit trail by asking this question, but that's what we do. Do you think that position, I think that position just exists because a lot of theists can't come to terms with evil and suffering. And that sort of explains it. Would you agree with that?
That is a motivating factor behind a lot of your open theistic or neo-theistic works. They would also, in addition to what you just said, appeal to certain statements of the Bible, like God repented that he had made man, or Moses prays to him and he changes his mind. And so God is not absolutely immutable. So they don't believe that God is immutable. Or you have God making inquiries. Like it never occurred to me that you would do this. Like the prophets will say to Israel sometimes these kinds of things, like you find in Jeremiah. And it sounds like God was taken by surprise.
Yeah.
So, or like Jesus is supposedly divine, right? And most of a lot of your open theists that are Christians, your Christian open theists by definition believe in the Trinity, right? You can't be a Christian and not believe in the Trinity. But here you have Jesus, who is God, saying that he doesn't know the time of his return.
Right.
So God knows it. So open theists are not saying that God doesn't know any future tense proposition. Things that he determines he will do, he knows, because he's going to be able to control it, the world enough to make it happen. But if God hasn't determined that he will do it, and he hasn't determined everything, then God doesn't know it. And so the Father knows when Jesus is going to return, but Jesus, who also is God, doesn't, because he wasn't a part of that determination.
Right. Okay. All right, then talk about neoclassical theism.
Neoclassical theism would be the halfway house between classical and neotheism. And neoclassical theism would agree that God knows the future exhaustively, but they will appeal to certain doctrines to accommodate that. So the most popular move among modern neoclassical theists would be middle knowledge. So middle knowledge is the idea that God knows not only everything that can be and everything that will be, but he knows all that would be if it were to obtain. So
Mm-hmm.
God knows under what circumstances Peter will freely betray Jesus. And so he so regiments history that he creates environments that, on the one hand, preserve human freedom, but on the other hand, God knows with certainty what you're going to do because he knows what you would do
Right.
if you were placed in that circumstance. Neoclassical theists don't believe that God is absolutely simple, which we will talk about in a minute. That's a general point. So Alvin Plantinga has a book called Does God Have a Nature? He's one of the greatest living defenders of Christianity, and he denies the simplicity of God. Neoclassical theists will deny God's absolute immutability. So, for example, William Lane Craig, the greatest living defender of Christianity, will say God is timeless before creating the universe,
Man, this is
before,
yeah.
but then he is related to time once he creates, and therefore he's drawn into time through the creative act. And therefore, God takes on what we Thomists would call accidental properties. So, for example, he becomes the creator of the universe. He takes on it's like he puts on a new hat. And since God, that change is really in God, where he once did not relate to creation, but now relates to it because he caused it, created it, and so forth. He's taken on a new property called I am the creator of the universe. And so the neoclassical theists are going to, on the one hand, say, yeah, God knows the future exhaustively. He's not given up his power. And of course, he's absolutely good. But the neo-theists are right about some things. He does change in some respects. He does accommodate in some respects. He does anticipate in some respects and that sort of thing. So that's the neoclassical. And then the classical theists are going to trace their roots back to people like Augustine and Anselm of Aquinas and many others. In fact, we insist that the roots of this view of God are planted real deep into the 2nd century and even into the 1st century. And we say that God is absolutely mutable before, during, and after creation.
Describe that word mutable.
Immutable, mutable, to mutate is to change. So what is mutable is changeable. So you and I are mutable. And God is immutable, meaning he's absolutely unchangeable. So when God causes the universe to exist, he doesn't enter into a changing relationship with the universe in the old conventional way of entering into a changing relationship. He changes things without himself changing.
And what would a change in God look like? Give an example so we can understand. When you say he doesn't change, does that mean he doesn't gain new knowledge, or he's not physical, so he doesn't like move from one place to another? But what would change in God look like?
Well, even though God is not physical, you could conceive of an immaterial being who has a certain disposition to do something, not doing it, but then is moved to do it. I
But
mean,
that
it's
implies he's
hard to
inside
picture in your
timeline.
mind, but like right now, I have a disposition to think a certain way, and then I conceive of a thought, and all that's going on in my mind.
Right.
So I'm moved from a kind of potential to think a certain way to the actual realization of that thought. So you can imagine God potentially creating and then being moved to create, and that act, that movement, just is a change in God. Just
So
as one thought
okay.
to another in my mind is a change in me.
So let me ask you this question, because I'm trying to figure all this stuff out too. If God is fundamentally outside of time, if he
Mhm.
is timeless, isn't that by definition mean that he is unchanging?
Yes. In fact, that's especially true if you follow, as I do, Aristotle's definition of time. Now, not everybody's going to do that, but Aristotle says that time is the measure of change in accordance with the before and an after.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Space is the measure of change in accordance with a here and there. So You
Yeah.
got
Okay.
it's very commonsensical view of time. So where there is absolutely no change, there is absolutely no time.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. Okay. So you consider yourself a classical theist. So you're
That's correct.
debating from the position of you believe in simplicity of God.
Yeah, and then that's arguably the most important doctrine that classical theists cling to.
So take a quick 3 or 4 hours and lay out what is God's simplicity.
Yeah, so simplicity just is the belief that God is simple, not in the sense that he's easy to understand, but in the sense that he is in no way composed of any parts. I mean, for example, God doesn't have physical parts because he's non-physical. He's not composed of matter and form
Mhm.
being the immaterial dimension of what you are, your essence, uh, your formal characteristics, your qualities, and matter being the stuff out of which you are, as well as the designation of you being this form rather than that form.
Mhm.
Right? But God is not composed of matter and form because he's pure form. God is not composed of actuality and potentiality.
Okay,
Right?
define that difference.
Yeah. So I actually exist, but I have the potential to become other than what I am. I have the potential to be at a restaurant with my nephew, his soon to be wife, and my father. We're going to have a lunch together. All right. I have the potential to be there, but I'm actually here. So I have what you call passive potentials or potentialities, meaning I can receive an action, like I'm hearing you speak to me, I'm receiving that action, and I'm
Right.
flowing. I also have actual potencies. I can utter statements and make you hear what I'm saying. So I'm an act potency being. I'm composed of actuality and potentiality. Well, if God had potential in that sense, then God would be a changing being.
That makes sense.
But God is pure act. He is pure actuality with no passive potential. The only kind of potencies God would have would be active potencies. He is a powerful being, right? So he's pure power, but he wouldn't have any passive potencies. And then finally, God is not composed of essence and existence. Essence is what you are. Existence is the fact that you are. And
Mhm.
God is not composed of that. There's no distinction in God between what he is and the fact that he is. And if you want a biblical justification for this, Moses goes to God in Exodus 3 and says, "What is your name?" Now, when he asks that question, he's asking, "What are you?" Because for the Hebrew, the name of something constituted your essence.
That's right.
Okay, so he's saying, "What are you? Who are you?" He's asking all of that. He's not saying, "Are you? What's your name, Tom?" You know, it's not just some nominal designator that I throw at something just so I can designate it. He's asking for the essence. And God's answer is very interesting. God says, "I am that I am. Ehya, Esher, Ehya." Go tell the Hebrews, go tell the children of Israel that I am sent you to them. Now, uh, when God answers the question, what am I? He says, I am. So he's saying there is no difference between what I am and the fact that I am.
It's amazing how much philosophy, your whole idea of divine simplicity can hang on that verse. It hangs on others too, but
Yeah.
it it's all developed in those few words. So,
Right. So Thomas Aquinas, and there he's reading the Bible in light of a tradition. And there's a strong classical Christian and Jewish tradition that gives a kind of metaphysical reading of that text. Now, whether he's exegeted it correctly, I think he has, is a different issue, but it's at least a strong reading of the text. So he's reading that text and he's interacting with Aristotle. And this is how Aquinas comes up with his notion of existence as a broad category in which to fit things. Because once the most fundamental metaphysical distinction that Thomas gives us is this distinction between essence and existence. And every contingent thing has that distinction caked into it, baked into it. That's
Mhm.
the metaphysic. So I'm a contingent being because I am composed of essence and existence. And anything that is composed of essence and existence requires a cause for its existence. Only that which is pure esse or pure existence can be the ground for the sum total of all contingent reality.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm arguing. But obviously, since the audience doesn't know these metaphysical terms, I took 25 minutes to define my terms and to lay out each premise one by one. And it's amazing how, from such a simple observation, changing and finite things exist. There are things around this world, including myself, that are genuinely composed of essence and existence. Once you come to that conclusion, you follow a chain of reasoning where all things are grounded. They are caused by that which is uncaused. And in the nature of the case, that uncaused cause must be pure esse, pure power, and at the end of the day, pure love, and so on. So all of the properties that Christians had traditionally predicated upon God, we must predicate upon this uncaused cause that we know has to exist given the contingency of the natural order.
I want to back up a little bit, Travis, because there's one obvious question, at least to me. You talk about how God is not composed of parts, but in the Bible, he seems to define himself as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, a fundamental, what seems like three parts. Or how do you answer that critique?
Okay, that's obviously one of the main reasons why a lot of people reject simplicity. As a historical point, please understand that all the debates that took place at Nicaea, all the parties debating this issue, as James Dolitz reports to us, and he's not the only one that does this, but all of the parties in that debate granted simplicity. Okay, so classical Trinitarian theology is grounded in the notion of simplicity. For the classical theist who is also a Trinitarian, the persons of the Trinity are not parts of God. They are relations within God. And so I quote the Council of Florence. All that is in God is God, and God is absolutely one and simple, where there are absolutely no real distinctions within him. So all in God is one and the same, except where there is relative opposition. Okay. And so there are three relations in God: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And those relations are really distinct. Well, how can that be? Well,
Right.
the analogy would be a triangle. The same surface of the triangle subsists in all three angles, so that there is no distinction between the angles and the surface, but there continues to be a real distinction between the angles and one another. So the same numerical essence that subsists in God the Father also subsists in the Son and the Spirit. And so is there a real distinction between Jesus and the essence of God? No. There's no real distinction between the essence of God and the Father, the essence of God and the Son, the essence of God and the Spirit. There are no real distinctions within the essence of God. And yet there is a real relational distinction between the Father, Son, and the Spirit. How can that be? I don't know, but it's not incoherent in the sense that I'm committing a contradiction.
Right. So are you open? It sounds like you are, but I want to ask it anyway. Are you open to the criticism that God is infinite and ultimately deeply mysterious, and therefore none of these descriptions are going to 100% nail it? Or do you feel like classical theism really takes care of the whole picture of who God is?
Well, my short answer is that classical theism takes care of the picture of who God is precisely because classical theism attempts to preserve the very mysterious character of God that you're talking about without losing the coherency of the idea. So if my view of God is contradictory, then my view of God is false, plain and simple. However, I don't think that anything I'm saying about God is contradictory, but it is very mysterious. In fact, we have certain doctrines embedded in our doctrine of God that preserves all this. For example, we believe that all of our language about God is analogous. Believe that all of our positive language about God is analogous. We have the simplicity of God, and we have the incomprehensibility of God, which I actually end my argument with. God is apprehensible through reason, but remains incomprehensible. So those three doctrines alone preserve the mystery that is God without entering into complete mysticism where God is wholly ineffable. We can't talk about God. If I can't think about God truly, then I can't know God. And if I can't know God, then Jesus says, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the one true God, and Jesus whom he has sent. Well, I can't cling to that verse as true. Right. So.
Well, Travis, we're out of time. This is great. You're really steeped in this stuff and I'm not, and I'm learning as I talk to you, but I find it really motivating and very exciting to pick this stuff up with one of my best friends here. So thank you so much. And so next time, everybody, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the debate. So good to see you,
God
brother.
bless you, sir. You have a wonderful week.
You too. Thanks. Love you. Bye-bye.